There is a real physical banknote, once issued with official legal tender status by a national government, printed with the number 100 trillion on its face. It isn't a novelty item or a prop. Zimbabwe's central bank put it into circulation in January 2009, and for a brief window, it was genuine, spendable currency. By the time it reached people's hands, it could buy a fraction of what its printed number implied, and within weeks, even that had become optimistic. This documentary is going to investigate how a national currency reaches the point where a bank has to print a note with 14 zeros on it, and what that number actually reveals about how money fails. How does inflation get this extreme? The everyday inflation most people experience, prices rising a few percent a year, is uncomfortable but slow. Zimbabwe's collapse was neither. Economist Steve Hanke, who has studied hyperinflations extensively, estimated Zimbabwe's peak monthly inflation rate in November 2008 at roughly 79.6 billion%, a calculation implying prices were doubling approximately every 24 hours. It's worth being precise about what kind of number that is. Official government statistics had already stopped being reliably reported by that point. So figures like Hanke's are careful expert estimates reconstructed from available price data, not a certified government statistic, though they remain the most widely cited figures among economists who study this period. To understand how a currency reaches that point, it helps to look at what actually happened in Zimbabwe in the years leading up to it. Because hyperinflation is never really about the printing press alone, that's the mechanism, not the cause. Beginning in 2000, Zimbabwe's government implemented a rapid land reform program that redistributed large commercial farms, many of which had been central to the country's export agriculture and foreign currency earnings. Agricultural output and export revenue fell sharply in the years that followed, a well-documented economic consequence regardless of how one views the land reform's stated political goals. With export earnings collapsing and government spending continuing, including financing a costly military involvement in the Democratic Republic of Congo during this same period, the government increasingly turned to the one lever still fully within its control, printing more currency to cover the widening gap between what it spent and what it actually collected. This is where the historical investigation connects to a genuine economic theory, not just a narrative. Economist Philip Kagan, in a foundational 1956 paper on hyperinflation, formally defined the phenomenon as beginning once monthly inflation exceeds 50%, and demonstrated that hyperinflations follow a recognizable dynamic once they start. As prices rise, a government's tax revenue, often collected with some delay, loses real value faster than spending can be cut, widening the deficit further, which pushes the government to print even more money to cover it, which drives prices higher still. This is a reinforcing feedback loop. Each stage makes the next stage more severe, which is precisely why hyperinflations tend to accelerate rather than stabilize once they begin, and why Zimbabwe's inflation didn't plateau at some manageable elevated rate. It compounded. There's a psychological and behavioral layer to this collapse that pure monetary theory doesn't fully capture on its own. As Zimbabweans watched their currency lose meaningful value within hours, behavior adapted rapidly and rationally. Money's velocity, how quickly a unit of currency changes hands, increased dramatically, because holding local currency for even a single day meant guaranteed, visible loss. Wages were sometimes distributed multiple times within a single working day, so workers could spend or convert their pay before its value eroded further. Shops in Harare were documented repricing goods several times daily, sometimes hourly, not out of opportunism, but because the alternative was selling goods for a price that no longer covered the cost of restocking them. Every one of these behaviors was a rational response to an irrational currency, which is itself worth noting. Hyperinflation isn't primarily a story about people behaving badly. It's a story about a currency breaking so completely that ordinary, sensible behavior starts looking frantic from the outside. Here's where the investigation reveals something. Zimbabwe's case, as extreme as it was, doesn't fully capture on its own. It wasn't even the worst hyperinflation ever recorded. That distinction belongs to Hungary in 1946, in the aftermath of the Second World War. Using the same estimation methods Hankey later applied to Zimbabwe, Hungary's peak monthly inflation has been estimated at a rate implying prices doubling roughly every 15 hours, faster than Zimbabwe's collapse 6 decades later. Hungary's central bank eventually issued a banknote for 100 quintillion pengo, a 1 followed by 20 zeros, believed to be the highest denomination banknote ever physically printed by any government. Placing Zimbabwe's note beside Hungary's doesn't diminish how extreme Zimbabwe's collapse was. It reveals something more useful. This isn't a single freak event tied to one country's specific circumstances. It's a recurring pattern with a well-understood mechanism that has now played out in multiple countries, in different centuries, whenever the same underlying feedback loop was allowed to run unchecked. There's a practical ending to Zimbabwe's specific story worth including, because it demonstrates something about how these collapses actually resolve. In early 2009, within weeks of the $100 trillion note entering circulation, Zimbabwe effectively abandoned its own currency. The government permitted, and the population had already largely begun practicing informally the use of foreign currencies, primarily the US dollar and South African rand, for everyday transactions. The Zimbabwean dollar wasn't devalued again or reformed. It was simply set aside, and prices, almost immediately, stabilized. This is worth sitting with, because it demonstrates that Zimbabwe's underlying economy, its goods, its labor, its actual productive capacity, hadn't collapsed by anywhere near the same order of magnitude as its currency had. The currency had become the problem, separate from the real economy underneath it, and removing the broken currency from the system, rather than trying to repeatedly repair it, was what actually ended the crisis. Today, that $100 trillion note has a strange second life. It's sold openly online, framed or laminated, kept as a curiosity, typically for a price far closer to the cost of a cup of coffee than anything resembling its printed value. Several university economics courses reportedly use it as a physical teaching artifact, because holding an actual banknote with 14 zeros on it communicates the scale of monetary collapse in a way a chart or a percentage never quite manages to. The note's current value as a curiosity is, in its own way, a final piece of evidence for the underlying principle. The number printed on a currency was never the thing that mattered. What mattered was always the real activity, the goods, the trust, the productive capacity that number was supposed to represent. And once that relationship breaks completely, the printed number becomes exactly what this one is now. A historical artifact, worth precisely what a curious collector is willing to pay for the story attached to it. So here is the hidden principle this investigation reveals. A hyperinflation like Zimbabwe's was never really a story about a currency becoming worthless overnight. It's the visible, extreme endpoint of an entirely ordinary, well-understood feedback loop. A government's spending outrunning its real revenue, financed by printing money instead of closing the gap another way. That accelerates precisely because each round of printing makes the next round of tax revenue worth less in real terms, which invites still more printing. The $100 trillion note isn't really a story about Zimbabwe specifically. It's what that feedback loop looks like once it's been left running, unchecked, for long enough. Hungary's note had more zeros. The mechanism printed onto both of them was identical.